Hello and welcome to the Wolf Den Podcast, your home for competitive Digimon TCG discussion and news. I'm your host Nako, joined by my co-host Zenitsu. This week, we will be discussing the EX03 tournament environment and our expectations leading up to the first event of EX3, the PPG Ultimate Cup. Listen to us on your favorite podcast networks. We are available on many platforms: Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon. Link in the description below, or find us at Wolf Den Digimon TCG.
We also are on twitch.tv/Zenitsu streaming this live. And on top of that, I also post it in video form on the YouTube channel of Zenitsu. So feel free to join us there and make sure to comment, like, and subscribe on those platforms as well.
For our viewer question of the week, this week's question is Cross Hearts still worth playing? I just picked up the deck prior to the restriction, and everyone has told me the deck is dead.
Well, considering the core TCG event just happened and there was a Crosshearts in top 8, I think it is still somewhat worth playing, at least in EX3 capacity. I don't think it's going to be as strong or as prevalent. It just seems like it's probably going to end up going back to being like an overglorified rookie rush, but I definitely think it is kind of worth playing. Just don't expect it to be like the boogeyman of the format or anything.
Yeah, the deck obviously got a lot worse with its major removal piece being restricted in the form of Sunrise Buster, and its major win condition being removed in the form of Cross 4. So the deck doesn't have as much oomph as much as it used to have. It's not nearly as scary, but it still is a recursive rookie rush. Like basically, you play a tamer that plays a Digimon, swing with the Digimon, you tuck it under the tamer, and at least not via cross four anymore. You're kind of in the waiting room for BT11 now as far as more options to do with those saved Digimon, but you still have cross five as a means of pulling them back out and using them for future value. Unlike Rookie Rush of old, where you swing, you tripped a security, and then you threw it in the trash, and you were completely fine with that trade.
I mean, you also still have, at least for the time being, Shoutmon King version, which could recur either himself or the Shout Cross 4 or even Shout Cross 5. It's just something to do, but yeah, for the most part, you're just swinging, watching your stuff die, get under your tamer, and then when you find a Digicross, then you just use it because you can. And the crazy thing is, Shout 5 is actually free if you use all of the pieces. Obviously, it doesn't like reset anything, so you are just stuck with the Shout 5. But like, if you already did a lot of chip damage with your rookies before, or your save material before, then you just really don't care. And then you do have some like cute little combo plays with Shout, with King Shout as well. So you could be like, okay, King Shout, Digicross with Shoutmon, grab back whatever, swing, tap Tai and Kari. Now he's basically a 6k swinging into the opponent's security. If he lives, cool. Let's just digicross into something else, and just continue the pressure. So there's still stuff the deck can do, um, but yeah, it just loses its big oomph win and oomph removal. I mean, you're still gonna obviously play Death Axe. It gives you space to run Crimson Blaze. So it's not dead in the water, just weaker, which is what they wanted.
Yeah. So, I think that pretty wholly answers that. We do have sub results to go over. Doesn't mean a whole lot for the future, but it at least gives us a litmus of what people are thinking about and playing right now. I know, Zenitsu, you have that pulled up in front of you.
Yes. So I participated in the Core TCG November Ultimate Cup. This was on launch day or like launch weekend of EX3. So they decided, instead of literally having everyone send in their deck lists at midnight because, it launched that weekend, if they could even get their decks in order, they were just like, okay, it's just going to be BT10 with the new restrictions in place. So as far as me personally, I got into 60th place, just barely managed to squeeze into top 64. I went 3 losses, 6 wins with Metal Guru X, and according to the results, that was actually a good deck to take. So, going over the actual top 16, first and second place, Metal Guru X. Third place, Grandis. Fourth place, Metal Guru X. Fifth place, Wargrey X. Sixth place, Metal Guru X. Seventh place, Cross Hearts. Eighth place, Mastimon. Ninth place, Blue Flare. 10th place, Metal Guru X. 11th place, Mastimon again. 12th place, Jesmon. 13th through 16th, or 13th place is Wargrey X, and then 14th through 16th were all Metal Guru X. So as far as the spread of decks, 8 of the top 16 decks were Metal Guru X. We had 2 Wargreymons, 2 Mastimons, 1 Grandis, 1 Crosshearts, 1 Blue Flare, 1 Jess. So that's just a lot of Metal Guru X.
I mean, I don't think that's a huge surprise, only because if you look at what BT10 offered and then you take cross arts away, what are you really left with?
It's like literally Jesmon and Blue Flares is like the only real prominent decks left. Um, like Bloomlord is still playable. It's just without Hydramon to act as like the actual backbone. It's just like you're all gas and no substance. And I don't think your gas is better than any of the OTK decks.
Yeah, and I know Jesmon, when set up properly, decidedly contests the board, but it's just getting there against metal that's the problem because you just you can be so quick with it that they really just don't even have any position to get set up and really start doing anything before the game's pretty much over.
Uh, my Jesmon matches went, like at most they would be lucky to get 2 Sistermons out, and then I bounce one of them and ignore the other. So like I just never really felt afraid of the matchup. I know they can't attack into my Garurumon at all because I just have protection against battle. So it's not like swinging into my Guru is doing them any good, and that's like half of the new stuff's game plan is to actually swing into the stuff, into your opponent's Digimon. So I was just like, it wasn't free by any stretch of the word. They were still dealing some really good damage. It's just I wasn't afraid of anything that they were doing because I knew I could just raise and then just clean shop.
Yeah. Um, and I think that's just the gold standard as far as EX3 is concerned. We'll have EX3 for a while, EX3 with restrictions, so this is like the new normal. Um, and just kind of looking at the overall, um, I know you and I already talked about it, but just like for our audience's awareness, that one of the ideas that I had for these was just to provide a platform for us to speak uh, on topics that we are going to talk about between each other, between our competitive teammates, and provide people that may not have that or pay either that friend group or that insight necessarily to have the ability to just kind of listen in on what our conversation would be as far as how do we prepare for an event, what are we thinking is going to be good, why do we think it's going to be good, and just have some of those like higher level conversations. Higher level just meaning that like I'm assuming that you're bringing this deck because you think it's the most competitive and not because you think it's cute.
But I really want to try my Holy Dragons deck. I think that deck is so cute.
It is adorable. But so that's really just the goal of this as far as is like both of us are playing in the PPG on the 19th. So,
I'm not. I
oh,
actually have work that weekend.
I lied. I thought we were. But I am.
I'm playing in Top Cut the weekend after though.
We're both
So
playing in
I will.
A and Ultimate Cup.
Yes, we're playing in an Ultimate Cup in the EX3 environment. I'm going to be
And
paying so close attention to that data to give me a
so
legs up.
I don't have any format. I don't have any data to go off of at all for this, and that's also I think why this point in time is slightly the most relevant for this to happen, only because you really can't use Japanese data at all. Not only is it like misleading at best, but it's almost wholly irrelevant now that Crosshearts is removed. And the biggest thing we were discussing was that while Cross Arts exists as a deck, it is not the competitive meta presence that it was in the Japanese format, and as a result, things that were good aren't necessarily as good. I mean, Cross Arts being the biggest example, and things that um, were good might not necessarily be that good. I don't know. I think I just said the sentence twice, but like the entire environment changes around it because some things that might have had just a bad Cross Arts matchup, but otherwise had good matchups or were good decks, were put down because you basically only saw Cross Arts. So it didn't matter if you had a great Bloom Hydra matchup because you'd never see it because Cross Arts was out there slaughtering all the Bloom Hydra players and knocking them down to 0 and 2. So now when we exist where you could reasonably see a Bloom Hydra at 3 and 0 in a tournament, then you know the format changes. So um, I know what I would play if I could just 100% take a deck, but I don't have 100% of the pieces I wish I had right now. So I'm still trying to workshop exactly what I'll be playing, and this is where the ability for me to go to my teammates, most notably as need to at this point, and just discuss what we think is going to be good and why, and use that to best prepare ourselves for the event ahead.
So, as far as like some of the big differences before we get into that, just FYI, in their environment, they also had Alphamon unrestricted, and we have Alphamon
That's true.
obviously restricted. So like that again also continues to change the landscape. Is there's just too many differences to really use Japanese data as anything than just hey, these decks were represented.
Hmm.
That's about all we could get. But I think that going into EX3, thinking about the all of the decks that are playable that we have left, I'm still, and given the results that we just saw, I'm still in the camp that Garurumon is one of the best decks to take into EX3.
Mm.
The only matchup I'm like half-heartedly scared about is Examon and Bloom Hydra, and it's more of the Hydramon part that I'm scared of. If I don't see if like they're playing Blue Hydra and they don't have Hydramon, I'm not afraid at all. Um, but Examon can be scary if Examon is set up, so Garurumon really just has to try to go as fast and hit as hard as it possibly can. I'm not entirely sure if they're gonna think about making a more of a pivot to using their level sixes more. Most of the time, the deck just revolved around good damage with the level 5, and then the level 6 was just cleanup. But with the new Omnimon X antibody and just the difference in the landscape, maybe they might make that shift to try to use the X antibody more. I'm talking about like the BT10 X antibody because just trashing the security and then like looking at the opponent's security, trashing it, and then the attack still goes through can just win games on its own.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the reasons I initially had gravitated towards yellow originally as a color, is because as a, former control player from Magic, information is the name of the game to me in card games, and just being able to absorb, retain, and utilize information in ways that my opponent doesn't necessarily need to care about or doesn't necessarily know he should care about, and win games off those margins was always something I found enjoyable because it was, you know, different ways of expression of skill. And the easiest point I had from that was just the standard yellow TK Tamer, which once you look at your own security, at least, until you recover, either from himself or additionally, in other decks that ran recovery, just the knowledge of your own security was invaluable. I know, like, without, telegraphing it, that I don't need to be afraid of potentially the first metal, if we exist in a format where yellow hybrid still exists. But um like the first wear that comes out is going to get Sunrise Buster, and I don't care. And I can completely alter my game plan knowing that I have like a bomb up there. Maybe it's not the top bomb because I shuffle the security, but just knowing I have nothing up there, knowing it's just a bunch of rookies and I'm like I have to play differently. So that knowledge offensively is even more so relevant. I now know if my opponent has any relevant security threats, and then if they do, get rid of the most relevant one.
Yeah, it's just super good, and that's kind of also why we saw a small surge in War Greymon X, at least in the last BT10 Ultimate Cup from Core, was the fact that they were using Omnimon X to basically act as that finisher because the deck doesn't necessarily have that much damage. It's not really an OTK deck, but it does now have that capability to use Omnimon to close out the game. So you use the Wargrey to try to make sure that your Wargrey X can hit as hard as it can, gain the memory back, go into a Blitz Omni to unsuspend and get an extra attack in to basically use X antibody to go into X
Hmm.
to close out games that
A
way.
lot of when
And
attacking Digivolving going on in that
yeah,
deck.
a lot of when attack digivolve, a lot of triggers and a lot of damage happening all at once. And I think that just contributed to War Greymon's success. And I think while Gaiomon is really good, without the existence of Crosshearts, I think it's not as good. It does have its good matchups, don't get me wrong. I just think like it's significantly worse because we're not super reliant on tamers right now.
Mm.
And that's what's making like Death X, while it's a big infamous card, and there's still a lot of go wide decks, it's part of the reason why I mean, it's not going down in price, but just losing a tiny, tiny bit of relevancy. Don't get me wrong, it's still going to be a highly played card. But if Where Guru is the best deck, and Grandis is one of the other best decks, because I still think these OTK decks are still pretty good, then that just puts those types of cards into a position where they're less effective.
Mm.
But as far as the big new deck out of EX3, Examon,
Hmm.
do you think it's overhyped? Do you think it's as good as it like seems?
It's it's a tough call because as the deck I'm most experienced with right now for EX3, I I see the deck's strengths. I really enjoy its control elements and how it introduces, new mechanics to the card game, how it really pushes the boundaries of what can be printed on a card as far as there's actually a lot of nuance, um, a lot of the way that the order of operations function in this game can be learned by just playing with or against an Examon because something I haven't had to do specifically yet because I haven't played into it yet is the Examon into Bloom Hydra interactions and some of the like basically technicalities involved of I suspend my Examon to force you to attack with one of your Digimon, which then you attack, which allows you to tap, which allows me to untap, and there's just a lot of order of operations going on there and timing windows where you can't suspend me because I'm not yet unsuspended because
On top of just suspend
I
triggers.
can't unsuspend until your effect completely resolves because that's against 99% of decks and I mean I've covered some edge case scenarios where it's become an issue, but as most players, will either visually or verbally represent the card, I tap, untap, goad, but that's technically not what's happening because I'm still tapped, you're goaded. Then I untap. After I cannot tap until you declare a target of attacking, and there's a lot of stuff going on there. But um, I like that it's getting more complicated. I like that it's getting more interesting. They're finding ways to print cards that allow interaction in that capacity. The entire evade mechanic and instances where I've um, dealt with, uh, example, like Zenitsu mentioned, another unfortunate loser of this, balance of power change is that Jesmon attacking into my unsuspended Examon allows me to suspend it to prevent its own deletion because I just can use evade if it's untapped.
Even just like if decks are running hard removal, you could just be like tap
Well,
and
yeah, because
then
the and
just dodge
then
it.
I mean, I also haven't had a whole lot of use out of it, but the deck does have a theoretical line of play that is just the most outwardly aggressive as far as if I get out an Examon tucking a
And the Slayer.
Breakdramon, yeah, that's 4 attacks in one turn. Assuming I have a raising, which why would I? But if I had a raising, then that's one, two, three, four, potentially 5 attacks with raising with hybrid lethal. Like
Yeah, so
that's
like it seems like the deck just wants you to chip during the opponent's turn and then just line up a big offensive push when you feel like you want to or need to.
hmm it is very much a defensive reactive deck with some offensive capabilities, but as any deck that can do big and grandiose power plays, like Jessamon wouldn't understand that the deck's faults in getting there. Like the Metal matchup, the Metal X matchup, I think is not great for Examon, and they just kind of end the game before you have an Examon out for the most part. And then even so, they have ways via new tech cards in the form of the Omni X that was just mentioned to get around Examon.
Or just some of their bounce effects in general. And the fact that the protection from basically battle just makes your goading kind of it makes it worse. Like it happens, and then I'm just like, okay, my Digimon's there. You just forcibly got rid of my sources. Thanks. I would have rather not, but it happened anyway. And then you just can't do anything with your Xmon for the rest of that turn. So it's like, whatever. I'll just continue.
Mm.
But I think like against decks like Grandis, Examon is actually like really freaking good because they can't do their thing. Like you literally with the goat ability just turn off their ability to do their big power play.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like because of that and the fact that we still have some OTK decks like that, he still has a place for the meta. And I still think he's definitely a good deck. I just don't know how good of a deck he's going to be or what that landscape is going to exactly look like.
I think maybe it's just what I gravitate towards anyway, but um, Examon just kind of ends up I think in that same gatekeeper territory that D Reaper previously occupied, where it doesn't necessarily do great into like the big three, but it basically makes it so that anything that's remotely competitive first has to ask the question, well, can you beat Examon? If not, then don't bother, because the only decks that are competing right now can.
Yeah. I mean, what do you think are the big three? Like, obviously, Garurumon is definitely still going to be super powerful and super prevalent.
I think
But I can't really
I
like
want to
put
say
my
Bloom
thumb
Hydra
on the
has to
others.
be up there. Bloom Hydra has to be in the running. Just because I haven't played against it yet doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. The Hydramon, yeah, like you said, adds a defensive element to the deck that it sorely lacked in BT10. So I almost don't even consider the deck complete until EX3, which is pretty much not the case for any other BT10 or BT9 deck, where they gained otherwise. If they're not a wholly new deck for EX3, then they gain relatively little. Um, and so you have Hydramon as a major component of the deck, as well as um, Entmon, I think, is still played. The Digisorption, new Digisorption level 5.
He's
Um,
pretty good. He's like hit and miss as far as like
Pomamon's, I
Japanese
think, more
lists.
relevant, though.
Pomamon is definitely relevant.
Well, yeah, so Pomamon is also, like, specifically Pomamon is what I was talking about with reference to Examon. Because
Oh,
they
yeah.
can't suspend Examon with Pomamon because he's technically not unsuspended yet when he gets suspended because of Examon.
Yeah.
um, but Pokemon's still a great card, still very useful. I mean, we haven't necessarily had a specific card that benefits from suspending itself on top of the fact that you're already gaining some inherent benefit from suspending it.
On top of the fact that it's also a vegetation to
Yep,
go along with it.
it's completely on brand. Um, so
Because
That deck,
Parasauromon is good, but like he's not
yeah.
on brand, so
Yep.
he's kind of hit and miss for the deck as well.
I think the deck just benefits more with Sunflower.
You
Yeah.
100% still run that.
Well, yeah, I just
It's just you
like
have some
completely over it.
extra space. Yeah, like you have some extra space to work with, but like I don't think Parasauromon is like where it goes precisely.
So that deck just really does have like a pretty tight core of it has enough on-brand cards, it has enough ways to go wide, it has some benefits of going wide, and now it has a means of preventing your opponent from ending the game while they're going wide. So, um, I don't know if it's the second best deck necessarily, but it's up there. Um, and I mean, I really have to just think here because I don't want to forget about something and then have to like bring it back later. But um, because it's either Blue Flare or Grandis that's the third best deck, or at least in contention for the third best deck. But I'm not 100% sure which it would be. I want to say Grandis, but at the same time,
If Eximon's a thing, I think Blue
if
Flare does a little
Examon,
bit better into that. Plus,
yeah,
Blue Flare also does better into Grandis, so it might be Blue Flare.
but
Because also Jessamon is still a popular deck.
yeah,
That still's pretty good.
I think Jessamon actually just doesn't have a favorable enough matchup against enough opponents. You know what I mean? Like it always has these power plays and it always has these big turns, but I feel like every matchup it just doesn't have a whole amount of retainability in its power. It has certain turns that are really good and certain turns that are okay
Yeah, I think where the deck struggles is mostly in those early turns, which right now, because of Garurumon, is like the
most of
most
the game.
crucial turns. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I think Blue Flare's biggest problem has nothing to do with the deck itself, and honestly nothing to do with the competitive environment other than if the best deck is Metal Garurumon, why are you playing the second best blue deck?
Well, it's not just the fact that it's a blue deck. It's just if
Yeah,
Garurumon, a single stack deck, is the best deck in the format, why are you taking a deck that does absolutely terrible into single stack decks?
mm, yeah, like you're just playing the blue deck that loses to the better blue deck.
Like you have, I think it has a good spread across a lot of the other matchups. It's just against your known or supposedly known best matchup as of right now. It's not very good.
I think Blue Flares is one of those losers because people basically swapped from Garuru to Blue Flare because of Crosshearts and because of the more defensive reactive nature of those decks, and they just don't have the time that they had before because if Garuru's running around and isn't afraid of people's securities because they're not running enough security threats to be afraid of exactly, and now Blue Flares doesn't have that grace period offered by the rest of the meta slowing down to tackle Crosshearts in a more efficient manner.
Yeah, because also if your start is just bad with blue flares, giving a lot of memory, especially early on, is pretty much a death sentence. You are just accelerating them just because you're bricking, and there's no real way to not do that. Just because it's like, oh, I don't see a rookie, and you're not digivolving into your level fours very often. You're hard playing them, and all of them cost 4 to 5. Even Blazing Memory Boost still costs 4 to 5, so that means it's an easy turn one level 5 for the Garurumon deck.
Mm. And it is a little unfortunate. Like it didn't affect the deck a whole lot, but decks were running 1 to 2 Tommy sometimes. A lot of blue flares, especially before they got their additional packages with BT11, were kind of half blue hybrid, half blue flare. Because I mean, ideally the decks kind of want to do the same thing. So,
That's
uh,
kind of what Sorai is taking up the space
yeah,
for. It's not super amazing because if you just Digivolve on top of the Digimon, they could still attack.
mm-hmm.
So it's like a Hexablaumon in option form, which is like both good and bad at the same time.
Mm.
So it's just sometimes just not efficient enough depending on the matchup in the deck. And I think like that's just the big problem with blue flares. Like not saying it's a bad deck because of that. Like it's still one of the better decks to take, I think, in the EX3 environment. It's just looking at how Metal Guru plays, I think the format just is going to be warping around Metal Guru because it was one of the best decks going into BT10 or yeah,
Yeah,
coming
BT10.
out of BT9 going into BT10 and then literally nothing has changed for the deck. Its matchups, the only thing that's really afraid is Hydramon if it sees it. Like
Mhm.
Eximon's not really that big of a deal, and then all of the other EX decks aren't a very big threat either. I would think like maybe Commandramon might be okay coming out of EX3, but I think still against Garurumon, it's just not that great of a matchup. I just bounce all the low level Digimon and still do
Mm.
all my attacks, and if anything, your security is slightly worse option wise because now you add in this new evolution line that was options before.
Yeah, you could technically, like, I don't know exactly what ratios people are running of the newer stuff, but you could technically run basically the same ratios you ran in the past, except minus a couple cards. Um, Maybe making room for um, just Seals Germon and like 1 to 2 Tank Germon, because if you play the old Dark Germon, you don't necessarily need to Digivolve up into the 6 anyway. You're just slamming it. And
I mean, but you it's a free level 6 most of the time. That also is going to remove bodies. Like it's just so good.
I mean, not if you are concerned about getting there before you lose the game.
Oh, that's true.
Because, I mean, there's an argument to be made that you could just run the exact same old list. No new Seals Dramon, no new Tank Dramon, just add in the new Command Dramon that is Decoy.
I don't think that card is just good enough as is wholesale. Like I wouldn't just splash that. I think that's easily one of the worst Commandramons, to be honest, but like it's still not that bad. I love the decoy mechanic on low level Digimons specifically. So the fact that they gave a level 3 decoy is just, at least for this deck specifically, just really seemed like a good move.
Um, yeah, it's still really tough because we literally have nothing to go off of other than prior data and just our idea of what people are gonna play and a rougher idea of how well those decks do against each other. Um, but with at least the new cards, just looking at what people may bring as a result, I do think there's a world where people try and make a yellow deck work. I know, didn't you play against one in the core?
Uh Played and lost to yellow hybrids, but I only lost because not because of any of my plays, uh, but because of, well, okay, there was one misplay that I did. I didn't understand how Venusmon worked specifically.
Oh, yeah, never mind.
Um,
I'm sorry. I actually
so there
straight up
there was
forgot about
that.
that. I'm sorry for calling you out like that.
Oh no, it's my bad. I thought that the pluses and the minuses canceled each other out. Because I'm thinking program wise, like
Mhm.
oh, if a positive and a negative see each other, they just net zero.
Yeah,
And that didn't happen.
it's
But
unfortunate.
I lost the round because I didn't find a level 4 to be able to kill them because I had lethal position
Mhm.
on the third game. I just needed to see my level 4 and I didn't. Um,
I'm just kind of like expanding the scope of like things that I should at least be moderately prepared for, at least as far
Security
as
control always, like,
yeah,
always be prepared for
unfortunately.
security control. As much as a lot of people hate that deck, a lot of people, for whatever reason, love playing that deck, and that deck will just never go away as long as the options that it can use just get better and better. And there's no real hard counter to just actually kill the deck outright.
Mm.
I don't think that deck is the winning deck to take. Usually, if your opponent is a good player, they should already know how to play around security control. And once they already have that understanding, it's like, okay, whatever, you're security
Though,
control, I know how to beat you.
if anything, like giving the deck the weight that at least it deserves, even if I don't like it as a concept or the people that play them. Um, the it's a deck that does better in earlier formats because um I've played into it recently, and I think I could beat it now, but I did lose to it at the time. So it's one of those things where I was inexperienced in the specific matchup, and I lost. But you know,
Well, I
if they only
also
need to do that in the first tournament, then that's fine.
I mean, I also think that just its matchups in general are getting worse and worse. Like you look at something like Blue Flare and it's just like how often do you think Security Control would be able to beat a Blue Flare
Yeah,
deck?
but who's playing Blue
Like
Flare? That's the point. Like that's all they're
I think
banking on. They just need to bank on seeing only like Metal X's and Commandromons.
I they still lose to those too.
I know. I mean, I don't think they have like 100% like a hard winning matchup anymore. Um,
They never really did if you like stop and think about it. It's just like
they
if
they
you are
they
a
still
good
they
enough
show up though.
player.
That's what I mean. Like
I know.
so it is something to be aware of, something to be prepared for. Um, the current iteration is basically just the yellow purple Mastamon shell without any of the Mastamon specific cards. It's just yellow purple.
It's just
Um,
your yellow purple tamers and
like
option
tax
suite.
control. Like I think I remember seeing it on Reddit. Like at one point, someone's like, "Hey, I made a yellow purple tax control deck." They're like, "Nah, man, that's just SecCon with extra steps." Like, because that's all it is. Is it's you run Kari to tax them. I mean in that the store championship I won when I beat the security control, I was allowed one attack per turn because I didn't have a memory tamer. They would put me at one memory. I would attack. They would tap two Kari, gaining two memory and ending my turn every single time. So tax control.
And I obviously, like I've been saying, if you know how to play against it, and certain decks just are better into it than others, I don't think it's that bad of like a matchup per se, depending on the deck. Like it's still going to be a deck that you should be thinking about, just because people are going to be playing it, just like Commandramon. Like all of the new Commandramon tools is going to really excite Commandramon players, and there's a decent chunk of those, considering how prevalent it was in BT9. At least for us compared to Japan, it had like a small resurgence at the end of their BT9 in Japan.
Now
But
I'm I, I I feel like I'm reaching, but I also don't really think I am reaching. I think we just genuinely kind of forgot about it a little bit. Um, that
what? How much good Machine Dramon is?
no, not Machine Dramon at all. Honestly, I'm just scrolling through cards and looking. Um, the armor deck with GX isn't bad. Like
It's
armor
not.
rush with G, like because it just wasn't represented at all in the last couple of events, so I forgot about it. But
It popped up twice. It won one event with BT10 limitation or without the new limitations.
hmm
And then it popped up again I think in like top 8. So it's still a fine deck. It's just do you think that deck can beat something like Examon?
uh, I don't know. I really don't think so. But
Like it
it
has
really
a
suffers from
weird.
source removal because armor decks, traditionally you only have like one or two sources. So if you're stripping sources, you're losing the ability to armor purge. Um, it isn't nearly as aggressive as it used to be. I think it really did just kind of take advantage of cross arts a little bit. I think that was kind of
It
the
was
the niche that it had occupied for that small time frame.
Yeah, I think it's also sitting in that like same position that Minerva Loop was sitting in, where it's just like it has a really
Oh
good
yeah, Rip Minerva
cross
Loop
arts
by the way.
matchup.
I know we
Yeah,
haven't necessarily mentioned it, but Rip Minerva Loop, like that deck actually just farmed cross hearts and was just it's not good enough in the other matchups. As someone who was playing it, and I mean, I'm by no means an expert. I wasn't playing it that long, but um, it just occupied a very unique opportunity where it could farm crosshearts, and it had a very strong crosshearts matchup. I mean, obviously not if they see their god pieces, but it did its thing decidedly, and without that, the deck just doesn't really have legs.
because like we're in a format where go wide decks for the most part are more prevalent, and even against Metal Garurumon, it's just like okay, like I raise and kill you, and you didn't have good enough options in your security to like stop anything I was
hmm
doing. Congratulations.
It was a deck that was kind of shielded by the umbrella that was the threat of everybody running Death X to counter Crosshearts. So now that everyone isn't just passively teching in two copies of Death X, just because they can means that they are now the decks that would have been punished by those other decks that were countering Crosshearts now no longer are countered and therefore are allowed to exist and now can beat Minerva Loop, if I explain that well at all. But it's just one of those decks that wasn't actually really hurt in any way. The restriction of Call from Darkness just doesn't really matter for the deck. You really only ran one anyway, but the real loss is something bigger to beat up on.
Right, because like you said, it was just there to farm crosshearts. Like, I don't necessarily think its other matchups are like overwhelmingly positive to where you're like, okay, as long as I see majority of crosshearts, I should be okay. Versus, oh, I struggle against this, and this. Maybe this isn't the best choice to take.
Hmm.
Even though it's still like a solid deck, it's just it has more negatives without crosshearts than positives now.
Hmm. I know you did mention Machine German before I changed the subject with my own rambling, but
Yeah,
um,
my pet project. I always like Machine German.
it looks okay, which is honestly the most it has looked in a long time. Um,
Keeps
uh,
getting support. It
it
just
just
keeps
keeps
getting
it just
support.
refuses to die. Um,
It'll eventually get there. I
I mean,
promise.
spoiler alert. Cause we we usually use future data and past data and kind of combine it to form our perception of the moment. And Chaos German slash Machine German is a tier 1.5 deck in BT11 in Japan. It's I think the fifth or sixth best deck. Um, Obviously it gets more support in BT11 because it refuses to die, but I think
Gets more support in BT12 as well.
people who want to play it, oh, that's true. People who want to play it in BT11 or people that I get because I mean if you've been playing it since EX1, I'm sorry, but if you were someone like myself where I have the deck sitting there since EX1, I haven't played it since EX1. I think I slapped some cards into it in BT7 when it got Chaos German, but I never played it. And now it's seeing support for EX3, BT11, BT12. Someone could reasonably pick the deck up now and just continue forward with it, making small changes as we go, which is ultimately my goal of a deck in a card game is that you don't have to completely change decks every format. Um, and so people might actually start that with EX3 with Machine Dramon only because it's not. I don't really think it's that many missing that many pieces, though the pieces it's missing are fairly impactful, unfortunately.
Yeah, but like it still just has a wide toolbox of things that you could do. I think like looking at some of the Japanese lists, they actually started foregoing like this insanely super heavy luck factored like level 5 package, and they started trimming down, and they actually do have an evolution line because you can use the new Chaosdramon with his on play slash when digivolving ability to basically get full value out of the card.
Hmm.
And then you still have like obviously Machine Dramon that you could use, and then you get like these really weird fringe plays that I kind of like was seeing with Kina and the Link Dragons,
Mm-hmm.
where it's just like, oh, Ragnar Lordmon is actually just hardcore playable. Like I could just
Ragnalord's best decks never include the traditional Ragnalord cards. It's just decks happen to include Ragnalord.
yeah, because similar to how the Link Dragons uses Dorbigmon to just shove a whole bunch of cards underneath their one Digimon to create a second stack out of nowhere, Machine Dramon can do the exact same thing now.
Yeah, so that at least exists. The like sub variant of Machine German that uses Flame German or not Flame German. That's the Hina Dragons version.
Yeah,
The starter deck has one of the inheritables as
Duramon.
yeah, Duramon has the inheritable of like end of turn Jogress. So
I mean, you don't need to do that in the deck. You just sitting on a basically super hard to kill level 6 and then spawning another one is just still good.
hmm, yeah, this Chaos Germon's a significant upgrade from the other one, even though the other one added decent amount of protection for the deck. I mean, my biggest problem looking at this is that it just doesn't stop the things that the Machine German stopped. So, um, it kind of like trades weaknesses. Though I guess without like it's just doubly weak to security control, unfortunately, because I mean that's something that I usually try to avoid in decks is that if anything, like I mean in BT6 I think I was just so done with the format. I played a deck that only beat security control. I lost everything else. I just wanted to beat security control. As long as I could convert one person to stop playing the deck, I would have been happy. But um
Everyone's goal. Just stop playing security control.
um
Please.
but yeah, Chaos Dramon unfortunately can be DP reduced and can be returned to security via Chaos Degradation. So his protection has a very glaring weakness.
I mean, but that's you can't be completely protected against everything. If Alphamon taught us anything, it's just that is too much.
Well, yeah, but he got his protections from multiple sources. At least, I mean, I guess
I
I would
mean,
be. You
you
could
do
just
have
run
cards like the new.
Congo.
Yeah, you could still just run Congo. You could still run God, Breath of the Gods. And then like they did get some like more support to try to shore up certain other
I
weaknesses.
don't think Breath of
So
the
like the
Gods.
new
I guess Breath of the Gods helps
Cyberdramon.
with the DP reduction, huh?
Yeah, and the new Cyberdramon just adds DP to him during all turns, which is just far better than just shoving in this gains 2000 during your turn,
Mm-hmm.
gains 2000 during the opponent's turn. So like they're getting the abilities condensed, which ultimately helps the deck out.
Yeah, getting better. Um, did they get? I think they got something in B. I mean, they didn't get. It wasn't BT10, but I know a notable improvement for the deck that um has just kind of been sitting in the waiting room. I guess waiting for now when they actually got good cards again. Um, was the fact that Machine Dramon can use the BT8 Metal Greymon, one of the better level 5s that have been printed in this game wholesale. And now that the deck actually digivolves, it can use the when digivolving of Metal Greymon.
Top of the fact that you just have the EX1 cards to just help you set up when you're digging for your level 6s.
So Machine Dramon definitely playable. I don't think it's the most competitive, but if I saw one, I wouldn't at least assume it's a free win, unlike if I saw Holy Dragons.
That deck, I swear.
There are just so many things you could do, and that deck decides to do none of them. Um, Yeah, we're kind of moving down the power scale as far as like we're talking about like decks I may see at some point. Um, Gallantmon exists.
Yeah, I think that the new War Growlmon is easily the best part of the new Gallantmon tools. Just being able to set up either your Tamer or a Guilmon is like absolutely insane because you have a lot of good on play Guilmons, you have the on delete Guilmon that came in the set. On top of the fact that you have the Warp Guilmon, so if you already had the Takato just sitting on the field, you could just be like, okay, here's the Warp Guilmon, and here's a second Gallantmon. uh have fun.
Yeah. Um, like I mean, if if anyone recalls my previous rant of like why OTK format was bad, specifically for certain decks, not that I hated it entirely, but um, Gallantmon is a deck that occupies a very specific niche of it is the red board control deck, and people at least now have boards. Melga X doesn't, unfortunately, so you still kind of lose there. But every other deck we've mentioned for the most part has a board of some kind that Gallantmon can take advantage of. So there's at least hope in that. I mean, I still do struggle to find a deck that I would be confident in taking, and if knowing that I would have a positive win ratio versus Melga over the whole length of the tournament, that wasn't just Melga itself.
Yeah, I'm almost tempted to still just continue to be on Melga.
Well, I mean,
Uh,
if you're already playing Belga, I guess is like my shout out to the audience, and you specifically because it just happens to apply to you too. Um, if you're playing Melga and BT9 and you're already familiar with the deck, there's no reason not to switch, or not. There's no reason, yeah, no reason to switch, because the deck is fantastic. It was going to get hit pretty hard by the changes with BT10, with the addition of cross arts and stuff such like that, but without those cards, without those decks, there's no reason to stop playing it because all the decks that it was supposed to be bad into are gone or worse. So, keep doing what you're doing because there really aren't any decks that challenge that level of speed, assuming you see your pieces as quickly as you usually do.
Right, and that's like the dynamic of this format where it's just like, okay, the only thing that can really challenge the speed is speed itself, and the only other deck that can do that is like possibly Grandis. Either that or just find ways to slow the deck down, which again, you need to be fast enough to do those setups. So like it really does warp a lot of the format around Melga X, at least in our perception, because like what actually is there that is in the game that can deal with this fast enough to where it's actually impactful and it matters.
Hmm. Um, I know my recommendation at least, because I still refuse to play aggro decks. I don't like them. It's not my style. I don't have any problem with them as a concept. Because aggro must exist to keep decks like security control from being the only things that people play. But um, I just run a slightly heavier option suite as far as like save my ass cards. Um, stuff like Ultimate Flare, Mega Death, I guess even Sorai would count in that matchup specifically. Um, the one of
And you also
Sunrise
have
Buster,
Cocytus Breath too.
Cocytus. I mean, yeah, just large because we keep talking about speed and how quick, like, oh, you don't have time for this, you don't have time for that, and if all of a sudden you do, a lot of these matchups become significantly more winnable. Not necessarily like it. We don't operate in a Grandis environment where Grandis swings, 3 checks at 17k. Uh, chaos degradation. Well, I lose the game now. Like we don't they don't exist in that world because they can rebuild. They do have efficiency in their evolutions. They do draw a bunch of cards just from digivolving so frequently, and they do have searching capabilities. But if something like an Examon has the ability to set up and establish a board, and then Melga has to come and check into it, um, there's at
Yeah,
least
then
they have a
Melga would
shot.
struggle.
They at least have a shot. Usually at that point, hopefully the Melga has done enough damage where they're just kind of trying to find the killing blow. They don't need to get rid of the Examon entirely as long as they can get around it in some capacity.
Oh, but that's
Um,
still so scary. That's what made like the Gaiomon matchup actually like kind of a nightmare. Even
yeah.
though you win that probably 45-50 or 45-55 in
Mhm.
Melga's favor. It's just the fact that once they get into that mega and you can't get rid of it, it's like, holy crap, what do I
Yeah.
do? I wasn't able to close out the game and now I just kind of lose
Mhm.
because I just aren't able to do anything.
Mhm. Yeah. Big blocker does stop Melga, but it's the can you get big blocker faster so they can get small attack boy.
I mean, that's literally the strength of Melga and why it's
Yeah.
so good is the fact that
I
you're
mean
just
that's
moving
the strength of aggro
one
decks
stage
in
fast.
general.
Yeah, you're just moving one stage faster than what the opponent is usually anticipating. It's like, oh, I'm waiting to go up into my level 6. Well, against Melga, I'm waiting to get up into my level 5.
I mean, if there's
Significantly easier, significantly faster.
there's anything to be said about this format, um, it's that with these changes moving forward, we have no fucking clue what anyone is gonna play or what's actually gonna end up being good. Um, because all it would take would be something like that yellow hybrids list to um have a stronger, more defined list and be played more, or um like Bloom Hydra to see a larger play and maybe some optimization in their play patterns. And as soon as some decks start to check Melga to the point where they don't feel like outwardly super confident and I can just, straight up digivolve and swing and then if I lose it, I don't care, I'll rebuild. As soon as they're potentially, in that aggro position of if I lose this stack, I probably lose the game, then the whole format just becomes a free for all of what's actually the best deck of any given week, um, depending on who sees what and when, and it's really just kind of a mess as far as trying to figure out, um, like just trying to predict what decks I'm actually gonna play against on Saturday because I really have no clue.
Yeah, and then
It's a
there's
good
still
place to be though.
also yeah, and then there's still also the decks that we didn't even touch on, like Mastemon and Ophanimon, where it's just
Yeah.
like, oh, the use of Venusmon could have a significant impact again depending on the matchup and the situation. So like there's this is the form like this is the type of stuff that I like seeing where it's just like there is just a lot of different playable decks and in a meta where it's like not actually solved, we have to figure that stuff out on our own, and only time will tell to see what actually is going to make the cut and be more meta relevant.
I know we kind of like rag on them like from a data collection slash competitive standpoint a little bit as far as like oh Japan, you know, they think they're so smart. They had, you know, Bloom Hydra, the best deck of EX03, but only for like 2 weeks, and then Cross Arts came back and just, beat the snot out of them. But um, we've really never had to walk into a format and just create a meta. We've always had some structure to deal with, regardless of how relevant it was. And this is not the first time we've ever had to do that. BT7, we had an altered meta. We've had altered meta based upon access to promos and whatnot in starter decks. But this is the first time where we really got the, hive shaken, and we still do not know where things lie.
And that's part of the fun of it. Like, not saying not using Japanese data to kind of get like a little picture, a snippet of what's to come isn't bad. It's just
Mm.
we have 3 months of this, and we
Yeah,
have
this is the rest
a
of the
lot
format.
of
This is BT10 plus. Like it's
yeah,
this
and
until Nats.
we have a lot of time with this format, and there's just a lot to explore and unpack with it, and
Mm.
that's the fun part.
Yeah, the best part is all of the matchups that I'm currently very unsure of, I probably will have plenty of experience in over the course of the 3 months of playing the format. Even with the holidays thrown in to, lessen the likelihood that I actually play the game. But, that's always going to be a thing.
I mean, yeah.
Um, I think that kind of is a rough overview of what we were kind of dealing with. Um, we have more ideas like this planned, uh, probably with more structure once we have some more experience. We just really didn't want to do a deep dive on anything that we ourselves would actually be comfortable deep diving because it just started. Like we got 3 months to learn these decks. Why bother spending the time now to you know at least establish a front that we wholly understand something when in all honesty nobody does.
Yep. I'm probably so what are you most excited to be playing, and what are you actually going to attempt to play in this type of a format? Not saying what deck are you going to bring, but
Yeah,
like what are you looking forward to?
most excited to play. I think there's a lot of room to explore decks that were previously completely written off by Japan or be built in different ways. I think there's a lot of room to work with Hina Dragons. I think there's a lot of room to work with something yellow. Like it just there's no yellow deck right now, so there's got to be a good yellow deck. The you can't be the second most competitive color from a large aggregate standpoint and then just all of a sudden have zero decks to play for three formats straight. So, um, I'm most excited to play the decks that like basically we didn't talk about only because they weren't relevant, but now they might be.
Feel that. I'm probably going to be doing my usual YouTuber thing, experiment and explore with a lot of different decks. I already was experimenting with Hina Dragons. I am going to be trying my hand at Machine Dramon eventually. Probably some Commandramon just because I'm an aggro player. So I already know what deck I'm going to be probably taking to the next couple of events until Nationals. So, I don't know. It just depends on what I feel in terms of what I'm actually going to take, but I'm just going to do the best that I can to explore with what we got, like you said.
I really hope somebody tops something. Sooner or later, it doesn't necessarily matter because these aren't like nationals qualifying events. But I want somebody to show up with the Imperial Dramon list, and then when they do their deck video, they just say, "Well, I just saw my pieces. That's how you peel. You just if you see all your pieces, it's a great deck. Just see them."
Oh my god, that deck is so like I love the deck in concept, but just the
As a
setup,
concept, it's
the setup
hilarious.
is just so hard.
But okay, that's this week's episode. Definitely leave a comment if you guys have any questions for potentially next week, and if so, we'll be back. Actually, just are we gonna have a episode go up on Thanksgiving, or are we gonna upload maybe earlier next week?
I don't know. We didn't really talk about that.
Okay. So it might not necessarily be when on Thanksgiving, but there'll still be an episode next week. So goodbye.
Later.